Hi, this is Arvind Bhartia, and we are here back to TFR Wrap. We are at the end of the show, and we have Rob with us once again.
Dragging myself across the finish line.
So yeah, we are all on the same track right now. That's the track we are. No, there's no hallway track. They just drag you to the line track.
It's a bunch of sleeping bags now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the event is over. I'm pretty sure that you had a lot of discussion with people in the hallway track. That's where you hang out.
That's where I love to be.
Where do you see things are moving for 2020?
Wow. It's interesting. The show had a lot of stuff about multi-site, multi-cluster, multi-cloud. It's really interesting. We're in this shifting space. And this is what I was talking about today. It's like, what do people see as the trend line? And it was really about, I have thousands of clusters. I have to manage a lot of different clusters in different places across different infrastructures. And it's pretty clear that we are positioning Kubernetes to be what everybody wants, which is this multi-cloud portable infrastructure. And that's a good thing. It's what the sort of the vision of abstracting out the workload automation would be. I'll tell you though, none of the vendors had a complete story. And so while, I'm sorry vendors, you don't. And while it's a really important thing for us to think about from that perspective, there's still going to be a lot of work to go. It's also notable that I think the 100th Kubernetes distro was announced here. So it's a crowded space. We're going to see some companies go, I think, in this case. Or probably by the time we're talking next year, there'll probably be 120 distros, but it won't be the same 100 that we're building on. 40 new ones and maybe 20 not there anymore.
So when people compare Kubernetes with the Linux, that's actually true. If you look at Linux distros, they're like hundreds of them.
There are a lot of very edge Linux distros, but it's a very it's a very asymptotic curve. There's a long tail from that perspective. There's like 2 or 3 majors, and then everything falls off really fast.
Is it the same case with Kubernetes also? Like who are the RHELs or SUSEs or
That's a good question. No, well, there's still, so, a lot of it, it's hard to get far from a distro with Kubernetes. And I think that's one of the lessons that people should take with this, is that if you're running Kubernetes, one of the other trend lines we see is that it's hard to get far away from the actual Linux distro that runs it. And so, yeah, we do see a lot of sort of gravitation around major distros, but people are working really hard to decouple those two things. But we're going to have to figure that out, because you're going to have to use a non-commercial distro, maybe an Alpine or something like that, if you want to really break the ties away from the Red Hats and the Canonicals and SUSEs of the world.
What I'm also hearing a lot is like a lot of companies are coming with their managed services around Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Mirantis announced, Kubernetes service. Linode announced. Linode was an unexpected player into this space.
Yeah.
So what's going on there? Like everybody's trying to grab onto the Kubernetes bandwagon.
It is. It's not exactly bandwagoning. I mean, it's legitimate interest in Kubernetes. And if you're running an infrastructure or providing consulting services, Platform 9's been doing this for a long, long time, as an example, then you need to be able to help people use Kubernetes better, right? If Linode's a great example. They have a cloud infrastructure. People are running Kubernetes themselves on that infrastructure. What you're really doing is just making it easier to consume something that people are already doing. I mean, this was Amazon's. They had to know that they were running more Kubernetes than they were their own container offering in their cloud before they had a Kubernetes service. So at some point, it's just, how do I help customers operate this? How do I reduce friction? And I think managed Kubernetes is a great way to reduce friction from that perspective, and it just makes your cloud offering stickier. I think managing Kubernetes for people is, that's more of a managed service offering, and I think we should continue to see Kubernetes get easier to operate. That to me is the big dilemma. Personally, I want to see Kubernetes drift towards easy operation, less overhead, less things you have to do. And so the managed service offerings have a tendency to hide that complexity, and they might not be motivated to improve operational, the operational simplicity of the system. And that's a classic open source sort of challenge. I've talked to a lot of people at the show who hope that we don't forget to make Kubernetes easy to operate, because at that point the enterprise market, is not going to be as vibrant. If we really want to see Kubernetes transition into the enterprise, it's going to have to be easier to operate, because not everybody wants a managed service. It's not necessarily the end game for Kubernetes.
What are the big challenges that you see for next year for Kubernetes? Scalability is there, or storage is there, or security is there?
Security, I think, is going to be a really interesting factor. We're changing container runtimes quite a bit and improving that. I would like to see more application performance monitoring, observability, more sort of overall pipeline tools. Right, GitLab is really, really popular, but there's a huge market of platforms that help people build, deploy, manage, monitor applications, and they're relatively absent in the container space. The New Relics of the world, Datadog had a presence here. I think Loggly, Logstash, they're here, but they didn't feel like they had the same presence in this case. And so there's a whole bunch of shaking out to do. And I would actually like to see those platforms get a little bit more fleshed out. One of the challenges with Kubernetes is there's a ton of projects, and you can bet there'll be more. But we're going to have to start building opinionated stacks, right? It's the idea that you're going to pick and choose, sort of pinball through this landscape and pick things. That's a lot of burden for most companies, and so we're going to have more opinionated stacks that sort of work top to bottom. And I would expect that to show up. That's a good thing. Sometimes it feels like a little sad that you're like, all right, I'm going to pick one vertical slice. But you're going to optimize for use cases, and that's a benefit to customers ultimately.
We also saw a lot of consolidation in the market. IBM acquired Red Hat because of Kubernetes offering, and then Mirantis acquired Docker, and Heptio was, I think, this year or last year. I don't even. It was last year happened.
Yeah.
But so Pivotal is going to be acquired by.
It's coming back in, yeah.
Yeah. So back to the home. What are your predictions for next year? Who are the hot ones to be taken, and who will take them?
Oh my goodness. I am horrible about predicting who's going to pop off of the market from that perspective. Boy, I'm actually going to have to think about that. There's a lot of small startups. I'm thinking about their new name, the Mesosphere renamed ITDQM.
D2Q, something like that, or D2 operations kind of.
And so I think what we've got a lot of people with expertise, and we're going to start pulling in that expertise. Makes me a little sad. I don't necessarily want to see these big companies get bigger, and sort of suck in all of the talent in that. It's going to make Kubernetes talent harder to find. It's going to cause, we end up with these giant islands. But I would expect that to happen, even though I don't want it to, because for people to build these really robust offerings, they have to be working in community. So they need community people. They have to be working in product. They have to be doing integrations. They're doing the work of operating the infrastructure, and it's going to require them to find more people. And for the smaller companies that are sort of struggling to find their balance in this, the acqui-hires are going to be good opportunities from that perspective.
I mean, I also see that sometimes the companies who start getting too much attention, they start doing a lot of great. I don't want to name any company, but they also become hot target for acquisition as well.
It definitely, the threat is the best way to get acquired, right? Mm-hmm. Look at what happened with that little technology company that was doing VMware migrations for Azure that got acquired by Google. There's certain big things that have to get done, and so those become, if you don't do it as well as somebody else, it's going to be, there's a lot of shifting pieces, and I would definitely have people think about storage and networking. Around that. The idea here is that, those things are major capabilities, and somebody wakes up and says, I really need networking, like Tagira or Weave or something like that. These are major components to building a stack. And so I love that these companies are independent, because I think they're more innovative and I think it protects the market. But as we get these enormous behemoths looking for how to capture market share from each other, they look for the shortcuts from that perspective. And it's a reasonable thing. I think VMware is going to show up. We already talked about VMware in after day zero. VMware is going to show up with a major presence. It's going to bring a lot more enterprise customers in. And the thing I would think about from that perspective is we haven't reached peak Kubernetes marketing, Kubernetes washing yet at all, right? Kubernetes so far has been a cloud thing. And now we have, VMware with a huge enterprise footprint showing up and basically starting to train all these enterprise VM admins in why Kubernetes is important. And so, in that sense, what we've done with cloud is only the tip of the iceberg. We're about to take a major push into educating the late majority, if you want to think about it that way, in cloud native techniques and Kubernetes and how to do CI/CD pipelines and things like that. So there's a lot of the market left to be brought in. And from that perspective, it's we're in a bubble right now with Kubernetes, but that bubble actually could get much, much bigger. And then it could pop.
So thank you, Rob, for like every evening offering your kind of insights into the event, and we will, as usual, we will love to continue this for every big event where you are.
We're looking forward to doing this about reInvent. I think reInvent's going to have even better hot goss. They love to drop announcements, and there's a whole bunch of things that we're going to get to sort of filter through, whether they're AI and outposts and take over the world strategies for Amazon, and we'll get to pick those apart a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.